is, good people, is finally something fresh and different from Fractal Design, the Era ITX enclosure. It's unlike anything we've seen from them yet, and a new ITX case on the market is always exciting, especially from a company that tries to cater to the mainstream and at the same time enthusiast builds too. And that's what Era is all about. I've spent the last 2 days working with this case, and it's not exactly what I expected given the mission statement for this project, as you'll see later on. It still faces all the traditional challenges of any SFF enclosure.
Power up your PC with Be Quiet's Straight Power 11 Platinum series, featuring 80+ platinum efficiency, a fully modular design, high-quality Japanese capacitors, and a Silent Wings fan that's optimized for airflow and silence. Choose Be Quiet and your components will thank you.
Alright, so first of all, we have 5 different color options. They're all pretty unique, and this is with a full aluminum exterior, plus TG and wood panels for the top. I've been patiently waiting for wood integrations on more PC cases, and it's finally here with a metal base plate and careful construction so the wood doesn't warp over time because of temperature fluctuations. This also means wood top plates will be unique to each case, but they're only available on the silver and gray models, while the more colorful versions get a TG panel up top, and this blue one in particular looks quite elegant and very bright. One note about the TG panels, they will be thinner because the wood ones are actually quite thick, and therefore the TG side of things should allow for more airflow. So you're looking to spend $159 on the Era ITX regardless of color, which is in line with other ITX cases, but still pricey outside of the SFF bubble. I love the curvature of the chassis and the ventilation pattern. It is quite a departure from their Define series, but it's not a small enclosure by any means. At 16 liters, it is larger than the latest H1, and also because it's not a vertical tower, it does take up more desk space. All the aluminum edges on my sample are refined, and I haven't noticed any quality concerns in the frame, and I have no issues displaying this case in my living room or at my main space. We've got a good I/O with the Type-C Gen 2, USB 3 ports, and a combo audio jack, and you'll also notice there are no thumb screws anywhere around the body, and that is because the side panels are completely toolless that sit on 4 pegs with these rubber grommets on the bottom, while the top plates are magnetic, so you can simply swap out the solid piece with the mesh one in literally 2 seconds, but the wood panels look just so much nicer anyway. I would say keep the wood on top, but maybe not, as you'll see later. The ventilation on both side panels is covered with a dust filter, so are the small strips at the bottom, and that is the only part of the frame that is not aluminum or steel. It is actually plastic, and in that cavity, that is where your graphics card will breathe. Now here's the interior. It's kind of interesting to see Fractal focus heavily on storage, power supply compatibility, and water cooling support. So for example, for storage options, this vertical bracket can mount dual SSDs or a single 3.5-inch drive, but since it's above the socket, CPU tower clearance is limited to 120mm with nothing on the bracket, or 70mm recommended with a hard drive installed. Then we also have an internal drive cage attached to an SFX bracket that lets you either mount a single hard drive or dual SSDs. Now the case supports full-size ATX power supplies along with SFX and SFXL, and you can see the 2 PSU brackets on the right there with a vertical mount system, so you can move your power supply up or down depending on your hardware. But because the second drive bracket is attached to the SFX power supply bracket, if you are installing an ATX unit, you are essentially limiting your storage capacity to only that vertical bracket. And then for water cooling, you can mount a 240 rad at the top or dual 120mm radiators too. And because the bracket is installed from above, wider radiators will not fit. Also, the top fan bracket can only be installed one way, as it appears to be symmetrical, but doesn't actually align with the mounting holes, so keep that in mind. But with an ATX power supply, only a 120 rad is supported, so Era ITX is most optimal with an SFX power supply because you're not sacrificing on the radiator storage above, you're not eliminating that additional drive bracket if you're going to use it, and it's also much easier for cable management when you don't have that massive ATX brick of a power supply that's also entering into your GPU space when it comes to cable management. Furthermore, you can install dual 140mm fans at the bottom as long as you use a single slot GPU or don't use one at all. And there are no 120mm mounts at the bottom because that will close off the already limited space to breathe for your graphics card. And finally, our rear exhaust fan is an 80mm fan running at 1600 RPM. So for my configuration, I went with a 240 AAO at the top, an SFX L power supply with slim cables, and an RTX 2060 Super that is nicely compact. So first of all, there is no room behind the motherboard tray to route cables or anything that isn't super slim anyway, so everything is pretty much internal. I am very happy to see a Type-C cable that is flexible and not bulky, but managing all the cables exiting the power supply area is quite difficult, as in my case, they start to mingle with my GPU space. So in a perfect scenario, you have 295mm of clearance for the GPU, and you can even remove the front I/O cover if that gets in your way. And even though the side panels are mostly solid, cable management is still not a strong suit for the Era ITX, which brings us to the most surprising and disappointing part of this review: cooling. And let me remind you of their optimal airflow mission statement for this project, which is definitely not the case here. So get this, the gorgeous solid top panel, which is probably why I would want to buy this case in the first place, is not adequately spaced out to exhaust air. And this heats up the system very fast, as you can see. Luckily, the mesh top helps with cooling the CPU, but our graphics card is still struggling for air. Removing all panels, you can see another drastic drop in CPU temperature, but the graphics chamber is so poorly ventilated, it absolutely kills any desire for me to actually use this in the future. And just for reference, I removed the bottom plastic cover, raised the case a little bit, and my temperatures finally got acceptable. So the culprit here is a poorly designed bottom frame that just cannot breathe and completely chokes your graphics card. Here's how Era compares to the NZXT H1 with the same hardware but a smaller AIO. Very surprised that even still we get better cooling inside the H1 on all fronts. And so the takeaway here is that we have this beautiful aluminum, wood, or tempered glass enclosure that actually gives users options in terms of hardware configurations, but completely sabotages on cooling. I would buy the case with the white oak or walnut top, but then you're penalized for airflow. And I would not want to use a low-profile CPU cooler, and therefore I would have to go with a mesh design in case I want to mount a radiator up top. They did not want to raise the top panel above the actual frame to keep it within design characteristics, but in doing so, you completely sabotage cooling for the GPU and the CPU when you want the case to look pretty. Furthermore, GPU temps are bad, and cleaning cables inside this thing is a bit of a mess, but the thing is, I understand the flexibility behind trying to please all types of users, but I think when it comes to ITX, focus is priority and is more important. Having said that, I hope to see more wood integrations on cases in the future, and I think Fractal is definitely going to push that whole momentum forward, but this isn't the wood for me. Alright guys, I'm Dimitri, thanks so much for watching, check out this other relevant content, subscribe for more, and I'll talk to you in the next video.